Going to some questions from you, to some letters, I will generalize the letters so it won't feel any personal. You feel that you ask me that question, not necessarily I quote you exactly. One of the recent letters I received was an interesting letter saying that, with all due respect, Franco, I respect you, blah blah blah, but I've seen your video on extreme vocals and I've seen that clearly, probably guy was really carefully watching what I was doing in a big screen. Anyways, he says, you in a couple of times, you raise your tongue. As much as I know, as my teacher tells me, never do that. And I've read the interview with Placido Domingo, with Jerome Hines, and he suggests that, this is a very bad habit, never raise your tongue. Now, my question is, why should I believe Placido Domingo, for example, or anybody else? It doesn't matter. Because Placido Domingo is an authority. Now, where on earth Placido Domingo got this idea? From his experience or from the method? Okay, it could be both, but let's say Domingo, I'm sure, had problems with that issue, with tongue issue, and he got corrected, and actually he profited from it. So that's why he values that statement so much. Now, if you ask Corelli, Corelli asked was the same question, and Corelli's answer was absolutely genius. As you know, Domingo for me is a great individual, is a great singer and a great mind. He's a very intelligent person. Corelli for me is a real vocal, it used to be at least, but he's still a vocal authority, which I don't have vocal authorities, but at least in certain ways he is one of the best vocalists opera ever had. So not to listen to his opinion would be stupid, to my opinion. Now, what Corelli answers in this question, and you decide who is following the method and who is following the sound. You see, Domingo said, oh, no, never raise your tongue, blah, blah, blah. And Corelli said this way, why should we be concerned if the sound is great? No matter, it could be like this. What if singer sings like this and he's deranged, let's say, his face is deranged, but he sings like this and he produces a great sound. And you change him into this and he starts producing the bad sound. And now, you've probably seen in one of my messages a student who says that he's 6 feet 3 inches tall and he has a long neck, is placed as a lyric tenor. Because he probably read after that what does the typical tenors look like and everything, and he had some doubts and he asked his teachers about, am I really a lyric tenor? I'm tall and I have a long neck, and they say yes, you are a lyric tenor. Now I cannot of course judge if the placement decision was correct or not, but let's say it was a correct decision. But I'm following the thinking of the teachers, which I think was absolutely correct. At least the answer was correct. They answered to him, you sound like it. You don't look like it, but you sound like it. And this is correct. This is, every teacher should be doing the same thing. The teacher should not look at okay, long neck, tall guy, is probably bass, bass baritone. Usually is working like this, as a bass baritone, because long neck itself supposes a lower larynx, but I explain later why it's it's so deceiving sometimes. I'll give you another example. My first professional teacher was a bass, a very famous bass, Pata Bucciolazzi. He sang in Metropolitan many years. He's shorter than me. His speaking voice is no lower than mine. He has even shorter neck than I do have a short neck. He has a shorter neck than mine. And he's a almost basso profundo. What do you mean? Basso profundo. And he is a big voice, like, roaring bass. Now, how can you explain that? I mean, if he comes to the traditional teacher who looks on superficiality, he will say, you're probably a dramatic tenor, or a tenor or something. You see, it doesn't work that way. And it should not work that way. The formula, because you sound like it, not because you look like it, is a correct estimation. We have, unfortunately, this prejudice goes not only with teachers. With teachers it goes, and it's surprising because teachers are not supposed to be that prejudiced. But it goes with opera directors also. And if they look upon tall and looks like a hero, big, they think this is a Wagnerian voice, dramatic voice. That prejudice is so strong, and unfortunately that affects your fate, and you're being discussed all the way until you find who you are yourself, right, with the help of a teacher. Now let's imagine that you are the genius. Let's say you have a great voice, a great instrument, you're very intelligent, you have great sensations, senses, open senses, vocal ear, so everything to be a great vocalist. Can you become a great vocalist? Absolutely, if you're raised on an island. You can't, because again, in our business, in spite of the fact that I'm also insisting on almost self-learning, there is one important element that you cannot do before you become a really true professional, is the one to really estimate your voice, how it sounds really. And you need a good ear, you need a teacher. Basic role of a teacher, even in this situation when the student is basically a genius, is to give him a good feedback. Because we don't hear, especially on the very beginning and the intermediate level, we don't hear ourselves. So we need this feedback. That's why we need teachers. Not to give us very difficult theories. This is true, it depends on the student. If the student is baby, is behaving like baby, teacher has no choice but to indoctrinate him. This is, I already spoke about it. If the student wants to be indoctrinated, he will be indoctrinated. Otherwise he won't be studying anything. If you're a student, if you come, please tell me, what are you going to sing? Oh, I don't know, teacher, maybe you tell me what I'm going to sing. Oh, this. You have your own real understanding of your own voice or repertoire or even the taste, then if eventually, of course, you will be enslaved to your master. My teacher knows everything, so everything. You will never become a singer. I'm not talking about a great singer. You will never become a singer if you have this attitude. So of course, it depends on the individuality, how independent you are. But even in this case, you still need a teacher, a vocal teacher, because you won't be able to hear yourself 100%. Okay, touching the tone again. I can demonstrate to you some sounds just to understand that, again, those who think in terms of the outer features as like superficially, they judge superficially. Raised tongue could be a reason for bad technique and woofing. Yes, could be, but not always. So if your teacher doesn't have ear, he just judges on a surface. Okay, if I do something like this, he automatically discards it. So no, stop it, do it, put your tongue and do it the same way. Even if I do it much worse, he will be pleased. You notice that. This is a typically structural, methodical teacher who does not recognize the priority of the sound and only follows the priority of the method, which is structure, which is a total ignorance for me. And unfortunately, there is some kind of mixture of this and that in real life. But for me, the good mixture, good balance in the teacher when his priority is the sound. We don't say that any teacher has a certain structural way of thinking. We all do. But this structural way of thinking, even apoggia, should not be the priority. The priority should be the sound. And structural thinking is very easy. Some people think, oh, it's very difficult, you have to be intellectual to understand the method and everything. But in fact, and I can prove that, method way is very easy to teach. The moment you memorize all the principles of the method, let's say you're talking about the raised tongue, and in your method you say never raised tongue is bad. So you see your student singing beautifully or not beautifully, and you see his tongue is raised, and you say, oh, stop, never do this again. I told you the raised tongue is so bad. Is the teacher right? I mean, theoretically speaking, we don't know unless we hear. If I hear, I would say yes. And the first, let's say, teacher is correct. The sound was bad, so maybe try to change the position of the mouth and the tongue. Or the teacher is totally wrong. The sound is great. Why the teacher is picking up at his tongue? You know, it could be 2 or 3 different ways of looking at it and different actualities. There's a clear understanding that teacher follows the method. And by that I mean his balance is on method, not on the sound. And this is very dangerous to study with teachers like this, because they don't understand the sound. And if the teacher does not understand the sound, they don't understand the source, the most important thing. They only understand superficiality of this or that. Understanding of the sound is a kind of a talent of itself, you know. And if the teacher doesn't have this talent, if he doesn't hear... Now, let's say, let me be very clearly. Why sometimes the teachers are good teachers, but they are very narrow-minded and narrow-schooled. Because they like a particular sound, they understand particular sound. Let's say Melocchi understood chiaroscuro very well, and he taught all of his students with the same method, the chiaroscuro. Those who survived became great vocalists. Those who didn't survive, we don't know them. So, I mean, in this particular case, their teachers more like him, and that's not bad. Well, you said, how many voices he spoiled then? No, he ruined not that many voices. But his method might ruin it, because he didn't take into consideration their individuality. It doesn't matter who you are, appoggio or placement. If you don't appreciate the sound itself, if you don't come from the student itself, let's say student sound, and of course there's certain traditional views. If you want to sing opera, you have to have a certain sound, definitely. But then the sound can be different from A student, B student, and you respect this flow of the sound, not something else. And this is more individual approach than just telling you what to do superficially. How can you get away from the vicious circle of method type of thinking? It's very difficult, because the whole human nature of thinking is to make structures. You know, and when you're a kid, you don't have structures. You just look openly at what happens around you. You just observe. And then, when you go to school, they say, okay, this is the way it's going, this is the process, the way it's working. It is not the way it's working. That's what the school makes a big mistake at the beginning. They should have always say, we describe the great nature, and this is what we know about great nature now. Not more than that. But the science doesn't want that, because it seems like not to be attractive. So they say, we tell you the truth. They're almost like religion. We know what God is. We know what truth is. It's absolutely total baloney, and the great scientists know that. We don't know everything about the voice either. For example, we know pretty much about the structure and how it functions, and appoggio. And I mean, those teachers who are really interested in a real serious teaching. Because if you don't know how the structure of the voice is, with different voices, everything, you only have experience of an amateur person. On the other hand, what is the most important thing, that the most important experience is the sound. So the sound is the source of everything. If you understand the sound, you understand the problem. If you understand only the method, then you'll be following structural things. In a funny way, appoggio can be turned into a method, like any of the method. In any method, the priority is not the voice itself, it's not the source itself. The source doesn't matter anymore. What matters is your outlooks. And in that sense, you see, Domingo, when he said that absolutely don't raise your tongue, he comes from his personal experience and also from the logic. I tell you my personal experience with raised tongue. First of all, raised tongue increases impedance. In certain ways, when you sing high notes, it might help you to support. Okay, it might help you to support. So it's used for support, for more impedance. When let's say you sing ah and eyes, and you don't have enough supportive muscles to actually bring a correct sound, you might use some of those modifiers, which tongue is a modifier. Now, when this tongue behaves badly, when it turns the sound into a woofy one, Most of the practices turn a raised tone into a woofy, like a trumpet mute. It mutes it. And okay, now if it's the purpose of muting the sound for some other reason, then it's correct. Now, if the sound mutes and you lose projection or you add some tension, then it's bad. But you can raise your tone without losing projection and without having any tension. I can do that. Maybe Domingo cannot do it. Why should I be another Domingo or even Corelli? It doesn't matter. I take the best from Domingo and the best from Corelli. As for vocal authorities, I would go more Corelli, Caruso, Lauri Volpi, Gili, and other great tenors. All you have to understand is how to work the sound, how to understand the sound. My student's brother was a big fan of baseball since he was a kid. He was playing in the school teams and then in the college teams, and in both occasions his coaches told him that though he loves baseball very much, he would never become a professional player because of his elbow or because of his hand, whatever. Now this guy plays in a Yankee team. This is my personal, I would say, the example from people I know closely. Another example is a famous example that I gave in my other classes is example of Paganini, the great Italian violinist, who had a drunkard father who beat him severely, didn't teach him anything. He almost made him hate music. Eventually, he sent him to another professor for auditioning, maybe if he takes him as a student. He also listened to him with his eyes closed, and he found an amazing sound, an amazing technique that you've never heard before. But when he opened his eyes, he saw something controversial. It went against his understanding of how human hands should function. In other words, methodically, Paganini was not playing correctly. He had incorrect position of his hand. Nevertheless, the sound was so wonderful that the teacher was intelligent enough, and I repeat, intelligent enough, to understand that this is a genius. And why is this a genius? Because the sound is great, the playing is great, but when he opens his eyes, he sees maybe incorrect position. I'm a guitar player, so I can tell you another example of, let's say, other guitarists who did not have the correct position of the hand and were the great guitarists also. Then we go and we see Enrico Caruso, who was desperate to understand his voice. His first teacher, Vergine, very famous teacher in fact, told him that he's not going to be ever an opera singer. At his best, he's going to sing in the churches, in a choir, and be allowed to sing once in a while a solo. That was his estimate. Enrico Caruso, we know all, was a great singer, if not the greatest tenors of all generations. Now we go and we look at the other examples. Richard Wagner, very few of you, even those of your composers, if you didn't study carefully the biography of Richard Wagner, I have his 4 thick books on aesthetics, on vocal on operatic aesthetics and theatrical aesthetics. Very few people know that he was a true amateur. In a sense that he never studied in conservatory, he did not attend any composition classes, except that he wanted to be a composer, and he asked his friend what he needs to be a composer. He cannot go to the conservatory classes for another 5 years. And he told him maybe it's a good idea if you take a counterpoint. And he took counterpoint, as all Wagner learned from composition. So Wagner is a genius amateur. We see the establishment don't talk about these things because they might think, okay, if Wagner was an amateur, then it could be a question, why should we need conservatories? Or at least, why should we need so much conservatories? If somebody can actually get it his own way. This information is kind of here. Of course, you can, it's not like a secret information. If you look at Wagner's biography, you can clearly see that. I told you about Paganini, Caruso. I'll give you another example, let's say, exactly, Bruce Lee. I don't look at Bruce Lee as just martial arts genius or martial arts actor. For me, Bruce Lee is much deeper, because Bruce Lee, yes, he was superficial, he was a martial arts artist, but he was a very deep person, a very deep individual, a true teacher. He learned from his first school that was more improvisational school, it's no style school. I won't go deeper, I already spoke about this. The point of Bruce Lee, when Bruce Lee was basically incapable of doing anything because of his back injury, he didn't quit. He went looking up to some books and found Jiddu Krishnamurti's book. And since Bruce Lee was a philosopher himself, at least he has a degree in philosophy, he became totally Krishnamurti guy. Because Krishnamurti always suggests that you have to learn yourself. You have to understand yourself, your nature. You're nobody gonna tell you your nature. And this is the great message of Jiddu Krishnamurti. Jiddu Krishnamurti philosophy is not to chew something and put in your mouth. It's the opposite. It to wake up your senses. It to make you a live being, knowing yourself. And that was the great message that another great Bruce Lee got from the greatest teacher of all times, Jiddu Krishnamurti. Another great example of misunderstanding the human nature and the human talent is Ashkenazi, the great Vladimir Ashkenazi, if I'm not mistaken, the great pianist, who, like Caruso, was denied to have a classical career. The teachers who saw him, they said, listen, you're a talented person, but you have very short fingers, almost reaching the octave, not more. You simply cannot become a classical pianist. You might, you'll be an amateur level, or maybe you play jazz, or maybe you play something else. But he loved classical music so much that he not only became a classical pianist, he became one of the greatest classical pianists of today. How can you explain that? This is the will, if you like. The will is very, very powerful. And will is one of the major strengths in talent. If the person doesn't have a will, it doesn't matter his other features, great voice, whatever, they all eventually go corrupt. If the person has a strong will and talent, of course, then will unite it in a good projection of that talent into the reality and into his understanding of his own self. I heard of many examples, and you may post or just give me an example of something like this. There are many of them, and not everyone is vocal about it, There are some singers who don't like, or musicians who don't like to speak about their shortcomings. They create the biography of, one of this is my favorite, but Mario del Monaco's biography, for example. I like this book. Let's be straight for a record. I love his book. It's full of humor. If he wrote it, of course, himself, it's full of. I read it like a bestseller. Mario del Monaco's "My Life, My Success," and now you can see "My Life, My Success." And inside the book, there are some curiosities, some problems with Maria Callas one stage, for example. There are some other things, but there's no deep analysis of the vocal problems that Mario del Monaco experienced.